He looked through his rifle scope and saw his brother, not a stranger, not the enemy, his own blood. One heartbeat stretched across 2 continents, and World War I delivered the ultimate horror. In the spring of 1915, a forgotten peninsula became a global graveyard. This was Gallipoli. The Allies, primarily British, French, and the newly formed ANZAC forces from Australia and New Zealand, sought a quick victory. Their goal, to seize the Dardanelles Strait, break through to Constantinople, and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the Great War. It was a gamble. It was a disaster. Instead of a swift push, they found trenches. They found barbed wire. They found an entrenched, determined defense in the Ottoman army. The landing sites, ANZAC Cove, Cape Helles, became synonymous with futile sacrifice. The terrain was steep, rugged, and unforgiving. The heat was relentless. Flies, dysentery, and thirst killed as many men as the bullets. This was not a glorious war. It was a slow, agonizing grind. A few square miles of sun-scorched soil became the crucible where nations were born and where families were shattered, often without ever knowing why. 2 men, born of the same mother, were about to find their fates intertwined on this bitter soil. The ANZAC, Sergeant Thomas "Tom" Healy. He was a New Zealander, strong, quiet, a sheep shearer from Otago. For him, war was an adventure, a call to king and empire. He arrived at ANZAC Cove in April 1915. The initial shock never left him. The smell of salt and death, the constant thud of naval artillery. Tom Healy lived in a shallow trench cut into sandy clay. His uniform was wool, heavy and hot. His skin was perpetually grimy. Days blurred into weeks of endless strain. Snipers were everywhere. Sleep was a luxury. He carried a deep private ache. His younger brother, Michael, had left New Zealand years before, gone to work on a steamer chasing the world. Tom carried a small folded photo, 2 boys laughing on a beach. He fought with the bitterness of exhaustion. The enemy was a ghost. Unseen, unheard, only felt when a bullet found its mark. He focused on his duty, on the man next to him. Survival was the only ideology left. Short, impactful sentence transition. Tom raised his Lee Enfield rifle. He aimed at a flicker of movement above the Ottoman line. The Ottoman, Savush, Sergeant Mehmet Öztürk. He was from Istanbul, a young man drafted when the empire called. His land, his home. His duty was to protect the Dardanelles, the gateway to his capital. Mehmet Öztürk was not a zealot. He was terrified. The invaders were a terrifying, well-equipped force. He watched their massive warships shell the hillsides, turning rock into dust. His position was a few hundred meters from the ANZAC lines, in a dry, crumbling fortification. His uniform was rough wool, his rifle an aging Mauser. The ground was hard, rocky, and baked by the Aegean sun. He was the rock of his small squad. He spoke softly, sharing his meager rations. He held no hatred for the men charging his trenches. He saw only other boys, equally lost, equally disposable. Mehmet also carried a secret piece of the past. Years ago, a small dark-haired boy had been taken in by his father, a merchant. An orphan, a ship's cabin boy from across the water. They had treated him like a son, named him Michael. That boy had vanished just before the war began. A memory, now hazy, of a shared childhood. He scanned the scrub-covered slope. The enemy was an abstract threat until the moment they screamed and charged. Short, impactful sentence transition. Mehmet adjusted his sight. He prepared for the order to fire. The unseen connection. The 2 trenches faced each other, separated by a deadly narrow strip. no man's land, a place of shattered trees and deafening silence. Tom fought for a cause he barely understood, dreaming of home. Mehmet fought for the land he knew, dreaming of peace. Neither knew that the man across the dirt, the man whose death would mean their own survival, carried a piece of their own history. A bond forged in a different life. A shared bloodline that World War I had deliberately forgotten. It was a small, diversionary attack. A rush to take a minor ridge known only by a map coordinate. The bombardment started at dawn, a brief, ferocious wave of Ottoman artillery. Smoke filled the valley, thick and acrid. Tom and his company fixed their bayonets. The order came. Charge. Tom scrambled over the parapet, the air instantly filled with the cracking sound of rifle fire. He sprinted, low to the ground, toward a barely visible Ottoman trench line. Across the field, Mehmet braced himself. He could hear the shouts, a language he didn't know, a sound that meant death. As the ANZAC line got closer, a specific figure caught Tom's eye. A man in a dusty, drab uniform kneeling behind a sandbag, firing steadily. Tom saw an opportunity. One clean shot. He dropped to one knee. He held his breath. He sighted the figure's head. He saw the face, covered in dust, grimacing with the pure strain of battle. A fleeting, haunting familiarity. Impactful pause. The face, the structure of the jaw, the way the light caught the man's dark, focused eyes, the eyes of his younger brother. The realization struck Tom not as a thought, but as a physical blow. The world tilted, the screams of the battle faded to a single high-pitched ringing. He hesitated, a fraction of a second, a betrayal of training, a surrender to the soul. In that same moment, a round snapped past Mehmet's ear. He didn't see Tom. He saw only the enemy surging forward. He had a duty. He had a target. Mehmet squeezed the trigger of his Mauser. The bullet traveled 100 yards, straight and true. Tom Healy, the New Zealander, crumpled silently into the dusty soil of Gallipoli. The familiar face in his rifle scope was instantly replaced by the empty sky. Mehmet kept firing. He had defended his position. The attack failed. The short, sharp battle collapsed back into trench silence. Hours later, under the cover of a fragile night truce, a grim, unspoken agreement to collect the dead, Mehmet was part of the Ottoman detail. He moved through no man's land, a lantern throwing weak light on the horror. He approached one of the fallen ANZACs, a young man, face down, his Lee Enfield beside him. Mehmet gently rolled the body over. He saw the dust-caked face, the familiar jawline, the eyes, now closed. He stood frozen, the lantern shaking. The New Zealander, Tom Healy. Mehmet reached down, driven by a terrible sinking compulsion. He felt the breast pocket of the foreign uniform. He pulled out a worn, folded square of paper. It was the photograph. Two boys on a beach, Tom and Michael. Mehmet, Michael, looked at the boy in the picture who was him. Then at the dead soldier who was his elder brother. The man he had killed. The man who had sheltered him years ago, before the war had erased everything. The air was heavy, still, no sound but the distant, mournful lapping of the Aegean Sea. He reached for the dog tag on the chain around Tom's neck. He read the inscription, T. Healy, Otago, NZ. The grief was not a scream. It was a suffocating, absolute silence. Mehmet had survived the battle, but he was utterly, irrevocably lost. He had killed his only kin for a war that had no regard for family, identity, or love. He was an Ottoman soldier who had just murdered a New Zealander. He was a brother who had just murdered his brother. He tucked the photo away, his hand numb. He covered the face of the dead soldier. The war would continue, the campaigns, the battles, the years of fighting. But for Sergeant Mehmet Öztürk, standing in the dark, blood-soaked dirt of Gallipoli, the war was already over. The enemy he had killed was the man he should have protected. He walked back to his trench, leaving his brother under the indifferent stars. He never spoke of the night. He carried the secret, a stone of guilt and sorrow, for the rest of his life. War doesn't make monsters, it turns brothers into enemies.